Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on Digital Literacy Foundation Years 1 and 2. My name's Anna Kinane, and I'm going to be facilitating this session, and I'm a lead educator at Grok Academy. I'm very excited to be facilitating this session today because I am one of the original writers of version 8, Digital Technologies Curriculum, and I was very involved in version 9, not just the curriculum, but also the digital literacy capability, along with the other original writers, Dr. James Curran and Paula Christopherson. So today's session is one of a suite that we have been presenting through the Grok Academy, and we're focusing today on digital literacy in the primary years, particularly F-2. So we're going to kick off with an overview of version 9 of digital literacy. We're going to take a bit of a deep dive and look at the elements and sub-elements. We're going to look also at the learning areas and how digital literacy can be developed and consolidated across learning areas. And we're going to have some examples to look at, focusing, as I mentioned before, on foundation and years 1 and 2. So just to recap, and if you've been following along or have been viewing the other presentations, you'll be quite familiar with this graphic. But it's a nice reminder of the difference between the digital technologies curriculum, which is our discipline, and it is very different to the digital literacy capability in the fact that we have students creating digital solutions, whereas in our digital literacy capability, we're supporting our students to be effective users of the technology. And when we see digital technologies lowercase, we're talking about digital devices such as desktops, iPads, smartphones, etc. So that's just a nice reminder of the difference when we're talking about digital technologies curriculum versus the digital literacy capability. And you'll notice digital technologies discipline always in capitals. Okay, so what's changed? So I'm very happy that we've first and foremost changed ICT capability to a new name, digital literacy. The elements have been reorganised and we have a new name for one of them. We'll share that with you in a moment. We have a new element called Practicing Digital Safety and Wellbeing. It is very timely, I think. And the good news is that there are very explicit links to the learning areas within the general capability. So version 8, those of you that were familiar with the ICT capability, we had 5 elements, I should say: investigating with ICT, creating, communicating, applying social and ethical protocols and practices, and of course, managing and operating. We've had a bit of a change now, and you'll notice that we don't have communicating and creating separate anymore. They've merged together to form creating and exchanging. We have investigating, no changes there. We still have managing and operating, but as I mentioned, we have the new element, practicing digital safety and wellbeing. So what does this look like? Before we get into the elements, I want you to have a little bit of a think about what digital literacy means to you. If I asked you the question, what does it mean to be digitally literate? How would you respond? So here is Akara's definition of digital literacy, and it can be found on the website. And if you were to take some time to read that text, that gives you a little bit of a deeper understanding of what digital literacy is all about. I have summarised that for you, and here is the executive summary I would describe it as. So basically, we're expecting people who are digitally literate to be able to create, manage and communicate and investigate, work collaboratively, and to select and use digital devices and systems effectively, and of course to protect themselves or protect the safety of themselves and others when they're engaging and interacting online. All right, so let's have a good look at the sub-elements. Right, managing and operating as an element has 3 sub-elements: manage content, protect content, and select and operate tools. Now, in the early years, so F-2, we're spending a lot of time supporting our students to select and operate tools and to use the devices appropriately, but also to be a little bit discerning about why they are using the devices and for what purpose. Here's an example of the expectations within managing and operating. So we are expecting a foundation for students to be able to save and retrieve content within an app, to also use some simple digital tools, and to seek help when encountering problems. We up the ante a little bit in years 1 and 2 and hope that they're able to save and retrieve content with an agreed name, that they're also able to use familiar digital tools to complete tasks, and again, to ask for help when they need it. When we're looking at creating and exchanging, and remember this was 2 separate elements previously, communicating and creating, but they have now joined together, and we're looking at the sub-elements of planning, creating, communicating and collaborating, and of course respect intellectual property. So the expectations here, no surprises. We're hoping that our students are able to use digital tools to collaborate and to communicate their knowledge, but at the same time, we want them to start developing understanding in relation to who owns the data and protecting their own data, but also considering who owns artifacts and information prior to sharing, having these conversations with students about these types of things. So in the early years, it's pretty important to start those conversations each time students are actually creating something or sharing. Practicing digital safety and wellbeing is our new element. The 3 sub-elements: manage online safety, manage digital privacy and identity, and manage digital wellbeing. All right, the great news here is that we can have some great conversations with our students when we are in other learning areas, in fact, all learning areas here, and even a nice alignment with HPE, and I'll share some examples a little bit later. But if you have a look at the manage online safety, we're asking the students to consider things that they might find that they might need to ask help when they're not sure or not feeling confident. So, for example, use online tools that are age appropriate or only used under supervision, seeking help from trusted adults when feeling unsafe. Right down to having a look at follow adult directions for the use of digital tools at school and home, and thinking about agreed rules for healthy use of digital tools. And this includes things like screen time, helping students to develop some healthy practices and having those conversations about what's appropriate and what's not. And then we move on to investigating. And investigating, the 3 sub-elements: locate information, acquire and collate data, and interpret data. Now, the great thing about investigating is that this particular element can be enacted across all learning areas, particularly mathematics and science, even in HASS. Let's have a look at the sub-elements. So locating information, we're starting to help our students with support look for information using search engines. We're helping them to conduct effective searches. We're supporting them to collect data and to communicate that after they've interpreted it. But you can see that we're not acquiring and collating data, or there's no expectation to do that in foundation, but in years 1 and 2, that's where we are starting to support our students to collect data and observe using familiar digital tools. You might ask, what are familiar digital tools? Well, we'll share some of those shortly. All right. So what are the demands or the digital literacy demands in the learning areas? Now, this is something I created a while ago, but I think it might be useful for you when you're looking at the other learning areas and considering what are the digital literacy demands when your students are engaging in these learning areas. Now, I think it's really important here to consider the importance of aligning digital literacy across the curriculum, because just as numeracy has its natural home in mathematics, numeracy is everybody's business. So we can consolidate and develop numeracy skills and understandings in all learning areas. Similarly, literacy has its natural home in English, but literacy is also something that can be developed and consolidated in all learning areas. So whilst digital literacy has its natural home within the digital technologies curriculum, you can see how throughout engagement in the other learning areas, we're supporting our students to develop their digital literacy skills. No surprises in English when students are reading and accessing information online, when they're creating multimodal presentations and they're communicating their understandings. In mathematics, as I mentioned earlier, constructing graphs, collecting and interpreting data. In science, using simulation software. Not so much in the early years. In humanities, again, locating information and data. In the arts, creating and sharing with audiences. HPE, again, looking at personalised plans for nutrition and physical activity. Languages, again, communicating. And technologies, particularly operating and managing digital systems and tools. Not only to communicate, but also to create and to collaborate. So what I've done here is I'm going to take you through an example using one of the elements. We're looking at investigating, and we're going to look at years 1 to 2, and this is how you will view investigating when you go to the Australian Curriculum website and you go to the digital literacy capability. If you click on locate information and you select level 2, years 1 and 2, you will see the expectation is that students will be able to locate information through search engines and in documents by applying search terms and select relevant information. All right, so down the bottom you'll see 2 graphics, the HAS and the T for technology. So we're going to focus on HAS. So how does this digital literacy expectation develop or can be taught in HAS? And here's a bit of a better view of what that will look like. So let's imagine we're clicking on HAS. So what are the digital literacy demands in HAS in year 2? All right, so when we're looking at history in year 2, the focus is on past and present connections to people and places. And the question we're looking at is how has technology affected daily life over time and the connections between people in different places? Now, the achievement standard asks the students to be able to demonstrate their ability to develop questions, to collect, sort and record related information and data from observations and provided sources. So, if we were looking at years 1 to 2, both year 1 and year 2 have explicit content descriptions that ask the students or invite the students to consider things that have changed over time. Now, the elaborations provide a lot more detail, and as you can see, an example here is where students will examine changes in technology over several generations. They get to compare past and present objects photographs, and of course, the skills within the history curriculum of questioning and researching. They're going to be asked to develop some questions about objects and events in the past and present, ordering key events, and developing slideshows or stories, for example, to show the history of a person or developmental stages in telecommunications technologies. So let's have a look at what that might mean. If I was the teacher, I might consider asking or supporting my students to look for or to find images of technologies that were used in the past and how have these changed. Let's have a look at some of the examples here. So we might ask students to use simple search terms and important keywords when navigating websites to locate images. And then we want them to use some presentation software to share their findings with their peers and help them to save and retrieve their images and presentations. So, if that was the task and the learning experiences we're hoping our students will engage in, we've crossed 3 elements of the digital literacy capability here. We're doing some investigating, they'll be doing some creating and exchanging, and they're going to have to operate the tools and devices. So let's look at the actual locating. So they're going to use some search engines and apply some search terms, and we might need to model that and support them. Then they're going to create some sort of presentation to share what they have found, and the whole time they're going to be managing and using these devices and tools. All right, where are they going to find the information from? So, of course, we're going to help them, providing them with some search engines, and the specific expectation is that they do locate information through search engines and in documents by applying search terms. Now, I would suggest here we model and we help them to refine searches, and we could do this as a whole class activity, looking for images of technologies from past to present. Again, here are some safe search engines that you might choose to engage in with your students. And when they have to think about presenting their images, here's some examples of some presentation software that is appropriate. Keynote, PowerPoint, Pages, Google Slides, or even GarageBand. And down the bottom, the expectation is that they will experiment with the features of familiar digital tools to create content. So here we are, again, a nice alignment with the digital technologies curriculum, because in the digital technologies curriculum in years 1 and 2, we're also asking our students to collaborate and manage using the basic features of common digital tools. And in managing and operating, we're expecting them in digital literacy to do the same thing. Now, the elaboration here in digital technologies says using familiar digital systems to create content with others. For example, using presentation software to retell a story. And in this case, we're going to ask the students to use presentation software to share some images to show how technology has changed over time. Now, I have provided here an example of some images that have been taken from the Digital Technologies Hub. And this is an actual learning experience, one that I did create that is published on the Digital Technologies Hub, where students were looking for the way the telephone has changed over time. Now imagine that they have found their images, and here is the learning experience. It's called Technology Past and Present. You can find that on the Hub. And if they were sharing their images, they might just create one slide. You might support them as the teacher to upload their images, to animate their images. You might even like to introduce voiceover so that they can actually speak about the images that they've found. And again, some changes to technology. Imagine the great conversations you can have when students probably don't even know what some of these items are, particularly the old vinyl record. And again, some more images. So on the history, while we're still in the learning area of history, another example here in the creating and exchanging, we could get the students to use voice recording in GarageBand to create a monologue about life in the past. And they could use the telephone voice filter to make it sound like a conversation from long ago. Now, while we are also looking at history, who would have thought, we could also be thinking about creating and exchanging, because in history in year 2, one of the expectations is that students are looking at local areas, places and buildings, and considering why they are important. The elaboration actually states, suggesting reasons for the location of a local landmark before searching for resources that provide an explanation. So I've been very fortunate to have had a conversation with a teacher called Rachel Mintz, who has gladly shared some of the examples that she uses with early years learners. And this example is an AR model where students can use the AR Maker and its Tiny Town template to create a 3D augmented reality model of a local area, such as a school, park, or community. You can actually see how students can create examples of their local area, and particularly if we're looking at commemorative sites or particular areas of significance. Now, this is another example here, again in HASS. Now, I've put both foundation and year 1 and year 2 examples here. And in this case, a nice alignment to the digital technologies curriculum where students are expected to follow and describe algorithms involving a sequence of steps, branching and iteration. Now, in the very early years, this is really early algorithmic thinking, where we're asking students to sequence events, put things in order. Now, you can see in HASS, one of the skills that they're expected to develop is to sort and record information, including pictorial timelines and locations on pictorial maps. And again, in year 1, collecting, sorting and recording information, including unscaled timelines and labelled maps or models. So students could use some digital tools to help them order images. They could even do this in PowerPoint, Keynote, where you could provide the images of events all muddled up and they then have to sequence them. Lots of fun things that you could do here. And my example is even sequencing milestones such as their birthday, their first tooth, when they began to crawl, maybe get mum and dad involved in getting some images and working out dates and times and years. All right, so there were some examples of how digital literacy can be developed and consolidated in HASS. Now we're going to take a look at mathematics. This example here, we've gone into the strand of statistics in mathematics, and the content description says acquire and record data for categorical variables in various ways, including using digital tools, objects, images, drawings, lists, tally marks, and symbols. Now, the expectation in digital literacy down the bottom says use familiar digital tools to complete tasks and consolidate learning. So I wonder what digital tools we would use to support students to collect some data and to share that. So the elaboration basically talks about using star charts or representing class data with emojis, or in this case, they might be engaged in a little investigation. Now, this one has also been taken from the Digital Technologies Hub, and I know that because I wrote this one too. One of the little investigations might be, what is the most common pet? How will I find this information? So teachers could provide some templates digitally, and students could use either emojis, or they could use images, tally marks, and they could, with support, record their data graphically. With support, they could also create some picture graphs, and we could, as teachers, demonstrate how this data can be represented in different ways. Here's another example using a template that was already created in Keynote, where students can collect data using images of their classmates to record preferences. Do you like pineapple on your pizza? This could also be simply done without images, just using tally marks. We could also have the conversation here about the use of images and permission to use someone's image, or asking permission to even capture someone's image. Again, a nice segue into the digital safety and well-being strand, or element, I should say. We're still in maths, but this would also easily apply to science when we are investigating the substrand acquire and collate data. This time we're using the Numbers app to collect and display data. Students could also add, so that we could have a template that's provided to the students. They could add some of their images and then add a voice recording to share their observations about the data that they have collected. Remember, they're consolidating and developing their skills in digital literacy, but in an authentic, purposeful way. And in this case, it's undertaking a mathematics or a science investigation. Back to mathematics, and this is one of my favourites because there's so many things that we could explore here. In the strand of space, students are expected to locate positions in two-dimensional representations of a familiar space, move positions by following directions and pathways. Now, I think many of you are probably familiar with some of these tools, but if we're looking at the elaboration, we're asking students to use a floor mat or a computer screen, moving forward, using directional language, backwards, left, right, adjusting directions, giving and receiving directions. And this particular tool is Lightbot, and I love Lightbot because it's actually an app and can also be located using that URL there. And students can move the little robot around, they can give and receive instructions, but again, they're consolidating and developing their skills in using familiar digital tools to complete tasks. And here's another example of Lightbot. Everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with some of the robotic toys, such as the Bee-Bot and the Caterpillar. And again, this is a really nice segue into the digital technologies curriculum as well. So we've got digital literacy, where we are managing and operating the tools. We're in mathematics, but we're also supporting one of the content descriptions within the digital technologies curriculum. And in this case, that early algorithmic thinking, follow and describe algorithms involving a sequence of steps, branching and iteration. And there you'll see the digital literacy capability, what is expected. We're expecting students to use familiar digital tools to complete tasks. Now you can see here how it's virtually impossible for students to demonstrate this digital technologies expectation without engaging somehow with a digital tool. Now, we could do this unplugged, absolutely, but if we are managing and operating digital tools, here we are in mathematics, engaging in space, the strand of space, locating positions, moving, following, receiving, giving directions, also aligning to digital technologies. So I think this is a really good example of how we are connecting the dots across the curriculum. Here's another example in mathematics, and this is, I love this app. It's draw and tell by Duck Duck Moose. Now, for example, in foundation, when students are naming, representing and ordering numbers, including 0 to at least 20, using physical and virtual materials and numerals. And again, in the digital literacy capability, we are asking students to manage and operate using familiar digital tools to complete tasks. We're going to now look at digital literacy in science, and I think some of you are probably thinking, or hopefully, that, wow, we do all these things anyway, so it's probably not anything new that you're doing in your classrooms, but now you're affirming that you're actually developing and consolidating your students' digital literacy skills. So let's have a look in science. And this is another example provided to me from Rachel Minns, and it's quite an easy one to enact. Shadow time lapse, measuring the movement of the sun. And again, in science, in year 2, the expectation is that students can investigate how shadow length changes with the changing position of the sun. Setting up iPad with time lapse. And of course, this is something that you can also do in other learning areas, but I think this one's a really clear example because the content description explicitly states recognise Earth is a planet in the solar system and identify in changing the position of the sun, moon, planets and stars in the sky. While we are still on science, we're now having a look here at another example where students are expected to represent observations in provided templates. Now remember, provided. So it's up to us to give the students the templates. They then can manage and operate. They can collect the data and manipulate the data and move it around within that template. They're also in biological sciences, observing external features of plants and animals and classifying them or grouping them. And some of the expectations, obviously, they're going to be operating the camera app. They're going to be copying, maybe pasting, dropping and dragging. And the elaboration is that they are using provided tables to sort their images or models of plants and animals. And here's that nice example here. And in this case, the students, again, are in biological science and they're developing their digital literacy skills. They're managing, they're operating and sorting their data. Staying in science, here's an example where students are using a screenshot from the weather app, and they could use Keynote Live video with the background removed to record a green screen style video to present the weather. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. And why are we doing this? Well, we are in science in year 2, where the expectation is that they describe daily and seasonal changes in the environment and explore how these changes affect everyday life. Now, you can see how all of the examples that I'm providing, hopefully you're starting to understand how you're probably already doing these things, as I said before, but the question would be, why are we using these digital tools? Well, we are in science. We're in an authentic learning experience. The students are developing skills across digital literacy, but also within science. A nice one for the arts, not just music, but also mathematics. And this is using GarageBand, and I love this. So students can actually look at creating patterns with objects, but then representing these patterns in GarageBand using the beat sequencer. And that's a pretty cool example and really easy to do. In English, when we are creating and exchanging, remember we talked about that element also is about communicating and collaborating and sharing with others. So while we're in English and we're in year 2 here in this example, students are expected to create and edit literary texts by adapting structures and language features of familiar literary texts through drawing, writing, performance and digital tools. So what does that look like? Well, in this case, we're asking the students to use some tools in markup to innovate on a story, adding a new character. Now, we've chosen Pig the Pug Picture Book, And I'm hoping that this might work when you see what I've done here. Oh, by the way, they are experimenting with the features of familiar digital tools here to create content. That's the digital literacy expectation. And when I press, hopefully you will hear this recording.
My is a cat called C. She's kind, she's playful, she loves to share her toys with Trevor.
Okay, so that's just using a simple markup and a recording, students to change the way things are going in a particular story or to introduce a new character, whilst in English, but also having fun with some digital tools. In science, back to foundation, again, where students are using the camera app to collect images on a materials scavenger hunt. They're operating a device, and they're also, remember, collecting data and grouping it and organising it as we saw before in foundation. This is what we're expecting our students to be doing. Here's another example, and this was given to me by another Grok educator, Meredith Ebbs, and Meredith has shared this example of Year 2 Science where students actually use a tablet to scan a merge cube to view the solar system from different angles. And there are about 4 or 5 content descriptions in Year 2 related to this particular science understanding where they're exploring Earth and the solar system, viewing images of Earth from space, and at the same time getting to use their iPads or their tablet and a merge cube. Now we're moving to geography. And this example here, again, we're in managing and operating, but this time students are using Google Maps. They're going to capture a screenshot. Then they're going to use tools in markup to identify known features and create a key. Now, this might be something that they are supported to do. It could be a whole class activity or groups of students working together. But in geography, the expectation is that they collect, sort, and record information and data from observations and provided sources, including unscaled timelines, labelled maps, and models. And there's the elaboration for you to read. As you can see, a really lovely alignment, digital literacy and geography. And another learning area that we have not forgotten is HPE. And HPE lends itself beautifully to support, for students to support this new element of digital safety and wellbeing, as well as creating and exchanging and managing and operating. So what does that look like? So in this case, we're asking students to we're having conversations with students about things that are very important when we're looking at online bullying or cyber safety. Some questions that we could ask our students: what are some ways people can be hurtful or bully others online? Now, we are in the HPE learning area here in Year 2, and the expectation is that students can identify and demonstrate protective behaviours and help-seeking strategies they can use to help them and others stay safe. Now, the elaboration states clearly that we're talking about the use of digital tools here. So proposing strategies they can use at school and home that promote healthy use of digital tools. So this is the conversation where we start to have with our students about appropriate use of online tools, helping them to understand when and how they can seek help if they start to feel unsafe or they're not sure about something. So in the digital literacy capability, the expectation is use online tools that are age appropriate or only under supervision and seeking help from trusted adults when feeling unsafe. Now, the managing and operating also has the element of protect content. So we're also supporting them to save and access content in their individual school account. Let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. So students could be involved in groups here or as a whole class activity or even as an individual activity or independent activity, creating a poster looking at online code of conduct. So some of the things they could talk about is cyberbullying can hurt people. No one deserves to be bullied, hurt online. Some of the messages are, not all online messages are nice. And helping students understand some strategies and things that they can do if they receive messages that sound a little bit mean or are uncomfortable or make them feel unsafe or scared. Some of the strategies, thinking before they send a mean message, not forwarding messages that are mean or hurtful. It's really important that we have these conversations with our students. And while we're doing that, we're actually enacting the HPE curriculum and also supporting the digital safety and well-being element within digital literacy. Now, here's an example where students could take a photo, add it to Keynote, use the drawing tools to trace over their image, and then animate the drawing to line draw animation. They then delete the photo, add the audio where they explain how they will protect their digital identity. Now, this should work if I do the right thing here. So there's an example of a student considering the use of passwords and how she's going to make them safe and not share her password, and then using some fun tools to collaborate or communicate that message to others. I was recently privileged to hear from the author, Kim Maslin, of these really, really cool student texts. And the Tweeting Glass series, if you haven't already heard about them, are really engaging texts for students to hear about cyber safety, cyberbullying, stranger danger, posting inappropriate content, screen time. Now, these stories are really engaging. There's some very cool illustrations in there as well. And there's also some reflection questions that can be used not only for comprehension activities, but also as discussion starters. So if you haven't already checked these out, I really recommend that you do. We're looking very quickly now at some examples of managing and operating. Obviously, if students are using or interacting with tablets, great opportunities to align with the digital technologies curriculum, looking at digital systems, recognising and exploring hardware and software, and the purpose for engaging with these different tools, using the basic features of digital tools to create, locate, and communicate. And of course, the elaboration, as we mentioned before, to create content, to share with others, using presentation software to retell a story. And the digital literacy expectation is that students are using familiar digital tools to complete tasks and to consolidate their learning. Here's another example, an unplugged one, but students are asked to recognise and explore digital systems in the digital technologies curriculum, but the expectation or the elaboration is that they get to make a model of a digital system, and in this case, they could create a box collage of their little Bee-bot or their floor robot, and making sure that they have included all the features, drawn the features on or constructed the features. And in this case, there's even a floor mat that has been drawn. And the digital literacy capability expects that students use familiar digital tools to complete tasks and consolidate learning. Managing and operating. Now, a nice alignment with English, where students are explicitly expected in foundation to recognise symbols that are familiar in their everyday environments and to have a little bit of a discussion as to why they're used. Now, that also aligns beautifully to the literacy general capability, where students are expected to recognise icons and symbols from their environment. And here's some beautiful examples of that, particularly when we're looking at online tools, tablets, lots and lots of opportunities to talk about the symbols and icons and what they represent. And here's some more examples. And you'll see down the bottom the content description from the Australian curriculum in Foundation in English, where students are expected to recognise these symbols, and we can have wonderful conversations as we're engaging with the digital tools about these icons. Students perhaps creating their own icons. I just thought this is a nice time to talk about how we can use NAPLAN Online to develop and consolidate some of these digital literacy capabilities. Now, I know in F-2, we're not, students aren't expected to participate in NAPLAN, but obviously preparing them for Year 3. So when you are considering looking at the test environment for NAPLAN, taking the opportunity to ask the students if they know what some of these symbols mean. So the microphone or the sign with a cross beside it, the ruler, the plus sign, the volume sign. What are all of these symbols? What do they mean? And what does that actually mean when you're actually in the NAPLAN Online environment? This example here is asking students to drop and drag. So having conversations about not just the symbols, but what's expected. What's the digital literacy expectation here? And that's managing and operating, being able to actually drop and drag, select, drop and drag images. Also looking at the icons, next and back. What does flag mean? What do the breadcrumbs mean? What do those numbers mean? And I'm sure you are very familiar with a lot of these robotic devices and fun programmable toys where students not only are having a lot of fun and playing, but they're also developing their digital literacy capability and, in some cases, enacting the digital literacy or the digital technologies curriculum, particularly in that early algorithmic space, where they're sequencing, ordering, giving and receiving instructions. Lots of fun to be had. This one I'm going to share with you just another example of hoping that our students start to develop a bit of an awareness as to which tools are best for particular tasks. For example, if I'm going to want to share, present information, what are the tools I might use? Presentation tools such as PowerPoint, Keynote, Google Slides. If I'm wanting to write some text, I might be thinking about word processing software. If I want to share or organize some data, visualize some data, thinking about spreadsheets or tools that you've already provided for your students, as we shared earlier, templates in numbers, and painting and drawing tools when we're creating. Having those conversations with students about what tool do you think we should use to support this particular task or to help us complete this task. Here are some resources that you might find useful when you go to the Grok Academy website. When we're talking about the difference between digital technologies or digital literacy, the Grok Academy have some cool cards that you might want to use if you are supporting other teachers in your settings to understand the difference. I highly recommend those. And of course, all of the resources, courses and content on the Grok Academy website are free to all students and teachers in Australia. So we've come to the end of our session now, and hopefully you found some value in some of the information that you have heard there. I think a nice reminder to recap is that digital literacy, the digital literacy capability, can be enacted across all learning areas, and by doing so, you're providing your students with authentic and purposeful reasons for engaging with the technology. Our next session after this one will be designing and assessing digital technologies projects. So thank you, everyone, and bye from me.